Hey, I'm TJ Castning. I am the managing partner at Ambassador Group, founder of the firm, and we do a lot of recruiting, particularly in construction. And let's talk about judgment, good judgment, because if you hire somebody, you really want somebody to have good judgment. And I'm using the term pretty broadly. Good judgment about how they show up in your culture, how they treat people, how they solve problems, how they follow your process. If you hire consistent people with good judgment, your firm will be successful. But there's a particular aspect of hiring that I'm not sure many people are familiar with, which is the level of standardization across certain industries. So I do a particular amount of recruiting in the high-end residential recruiting space, high-end residential construction. And so when I say high-end residential, there's many definitions. What I mean is 10 million plus, sometimes up to 100 million. These are almost commercial grade high-end residential projects and companies that specialize in them. And so if you think about that space and that type of problem solving versus, say, highway construction, it's very different types of construction because highway construction is, in some sense, a solved problem, right? We know how to build highways. There's a certain level of engineering, and a lot of highway buildings to be successful is repping this process that's been well established for, probably close to a century. Whereas in high-end residential, the level of standardization in how something gets built is not nearly as constrained by the norms and standards, particularly because you're not working for a state or the federal government. There's obviously regulations around labor laws, safety, building codes, but the nature of high-end residential construction is, in some sense, quite unconstrained, right? The budgets are different. The type of construction is different. We want to build something unique. And you're constantly pushing the threshold of what is normal. And so when a highway builder hires from, say, another highway builder, they can hire with some level of expectation that if this person solved on this problem for a period of time, there's a decent chance that the person can understand how highway construction might work in this firm. Obviously, there's going to be differences, but the inherent standardization of the industry will solve a lot of the ambiguity and the risk management in the interview process. Other highly regulated industries can be like this too. Industries like finance, for example, highly regulated, and you're expected to operate within certain norms, sometimes very narrow norms. In high-end residential construction, this is not the case. The end product, in some sense, might be the same, but the ways in which companies get there philosophically, process, they're estimating, the way the relationship dynamic is with the owner, with the architect, with consultants, how superintendents run, what their project management process looks like, what their contract structure looks like. There's a tremendous amount of variety and diversity in that. And that adds an extra level of challenge and complication to assessing candidates because if you have a superintendent or project manager from a competitor, they may have the same title, superintendent, project manager, and in some sense, they've built the same type of work, right? They've built a $20 million home and maybe they've done it for quite a bit. But the devil can be in the details. The fit can be in the details of, well, what exactly do we believe about how we work with subs, how we estimate, how we handle change orders, how we handle a schedule, how we solve problems internally, externally. And I've seen a lot of people come from firms that are successful. They were successful in those firms, join another firm that is by its own right successful and not succeed because both parties underestimated the level of variance that there was between the firms. And this really comes down to the level of standardization in the industry and the level of standardization in the companies. In high-end residential, for example, how companies define field roles, a foreman role, a superintendent role, project management role, an APM role varies widely across the industry. And so when we see these titles on a resume, it's wise not to take those things for granted and actually dive into what particularly were you responsible for, over what time period, What did this look like? What were hard challenges that you solved? What were hard decisions that you made? And get specific about what those things were, and even more importantly, what the mindset is behind those decisions, what the belief system is about why we do things this way, what we believe is good in construction, risk management, what's the level of relationship to look for versus protecting our own interest, how much are we willing to compromise, etc. There's a lot of different philosophies out there in the high-end residential space. And I realized some of these variables can exist within other companies that are more standardized. But once again, what I'm trying to highlight is there's a spectrum of standardization across industries and across companies. And companies who exist in unstandardized industries, like high-end residentials, do well in their interview process when they recognize that. They strive for a level of clear standardization in their own firm. So they define these things. They define, what does our project management look like? What does our superintendent process look like? Scheduling, change orders, submittals, RFIs, etc. Why do we do these things? What's our mission statement? What's our core values? From what place of value, of service, of conviction, of passion, do we then extrapolate out and choose how to behave in all of these various contexts? And so when you're interviewing a candidate, you're trying to understand the level of standardization that they experienced in their work or that they imposed in their work, and how that may translate to your firm. And so what you'll quickly realize as you delve into this is it takes a long time to really pull this apart in oneself. It can be a bit of a process of self-awareness, a little bit of a, a seeing the trees and the forest kind of problem. A lot of times we're all in our careers or in our businesses studying our problems up close, and we don't have a lot of perspective on how other companies run or how other people do the job. And this lack of organizational self-awareness or individual self-awareness can be a real risk factor in the interview process, because how do we expose the unique ways in which we think? And how do we do this quickly, right? And how do we do this with people that we're still getting to know, we're not sure we're comfortable with, we're not really sure we're safe with, we're not sure if they've got our best interest at heart? This makes interviewing, particularly when we're trying to compress this down to a matter of hours, pretty difficult. Because if you think about a good PM hire or a good superintendent hire in the high-end residential space, these are million-dollar decisions, right? This is going to impact project financials, company morale, reputation with clients. There can be so many things that go well or poorly based on a hire. And to control these variables, to remove this ambiguity, you want to know as much as possible about this person. You want them to know as much about what they're getting themselves into. And this is a process that never really ends, of developing more self-awareness and the ability to develop a clearer understanding of where somebody else is coming from. And so a few pieces of advice in recognizing this problem of unstandardized interviewing in unstandardized industries is go in with a mindset of trying to standardize your interviews to the level of self-awareness that you do have in your organization, and try to be explicit about how you perceive yourself to be different than other firms, what's really important to you about your beliefs about construction, your beliefs about how people should be treated, your beliefs about how finances work, scheduling works, because you have beliefs. And it's not the way to do it. A lot of leaders have their way of doing it, and they think that's the way to do it. And I can tell you, as a recruiter who's seen inside hundreds of organizations, there's a lot of different ways to approach these problems. And when we have a myopic view of our way of doing things, we expect other people to see that, and we make those expectations, assumptions, because of their years of experience or because of their project list. We are taking on some dangerous levels of risk for that candidate and for us. So get into the details, right? Get into the details of ask why 5 times, ask them about what they believe about scheduling, about OAC meetings, about client communication, about change orders, about design, about working with architects. Ask them about bad experiences, good experiences, and try to get an understanding of the heuristic that they use to go through a process, because everybody's going to come at that with a little bit of difference, and not for worse. everybody's personality affects the way they do their job. So um, this requires a degree of humility and curiosity that some interviews struggle with. They have a little bit of a hierarchical or authority frame when they're interviewing, and this requires a little bit more of a collaboration, a curiosity, a comparing of notes. Um, but those kind of recruiters, excuse me, those kind of interviewers, I guess recruiters too, um, candidates and interviewers can really mitigate a lot of risk when you're interviewing if you go to that detail. And one thing that this requires is you've got to get past the interview veneer. What do I mean by the interview veneer? There's a phase in an interview where everybody's showing up. They don't really know each other. They might be nervous. They might be a little bit fearful. They might want the job. They might have a fear of being judged. We all have a degree of insecurity in ourselves. And so more quickly we can put each other at ease, the more quickly we can help each other feel safe with each other and get past that phase of trying to look good in the interview and really collaboratively evaluating our collective fit and increasing the level of informed commitment between us, the more quickly we can have this conversation that gets through this unstandardized problem. We start understanding the unique perspectives that we have on the industry and the business and the problem solving techniques. And we can take advantage of the knowledge each other has, learn from each other, and make really good decisions together about, who we should work with. I hope this is helpful. Like, subscribe, comment. I'd love to know what you think about norming your interviews and getting to know candidates at a deeper level, especially if you work in the high-end residential space.